What's the creepiest thing that you've seen other families do that they accept as totally normal? Two weird-ass stories for you, and bear with me because the creepiest part is at the end. So, I was probably like 9 or 10, I can't remember exactly, but I met this girl my age who lived a few houses away. She had 2 brothers, an older one and a younger one. They had a trampoline, so you better believe I was over there almost every day during the summer. One day, their parents invited me to go to church with them. Their father was the pastor and really wanted me to come along. I wasn't very religious, but I'd been to church before and figured it was no big deal, so I decided to go. Guys, this church was one of those huge Christian churches with at least 1,000 members, if not more. I'm talking massive. It had its own cafe, library, and everything. Now, here's what happened. During the sermon, there was a moment where the pastor, my friend's dad, said, "And for those of you who have not accepted Jesus Christ as your Savior, I strongly encourage you to come up here now and accept Him into your heart." At that point, a few other men who looked like pastors came and stood beside him. Me being me, I just fucking sat there while 3 to 4 other people went up. Out of nowhere, the mom turns to me and says, "Go on, sweetie." I give her this, "It's okay, really," line, but then the dad/pastor calls my name, on the mic. There were at least 500 people in that room, and they were using a headset mic so everyone could hear. Did I mention there was a huge, movie theater-sized screen at the back showing the pastor on stage? Yeah. So now I'm a nervous mess with no choice but to walk up in front of all those people and basically get saved against my will. They made me repeat these lines like, "I have sinned, and I accept Christ into my heart for all eternity," while other people, grown men, were doing the same thing. One of them even broke down and ugly cried all over the stage. I was mortified and thoroughly embarrassed. When it was finally over, I plastered on the fakest smile, but inside, I was screaming. I couldn't wait to go home. Here's the really creepy part. Afterward, in the car, I politely asked if they could just drop me off at my house since it was close to theirs. The mom says, "Oh, honey, we were hoping you could join us for dinner. I don't mind giving you a ride after we're finished." It's really hard for me to say no to people, so I reluctantly agreed. I hung out with my friend and her brothers for a bit, and then the mom came outside to tell us dinner was ready. We went into the dining room, and all the food was set out. Everything seemed normal, except for the framed picture of Jesus sitting in the middle of the table, propped up against the centerpiece. We sat down, the father said grace, and in my head, I'm thinking, cool, we can eat now, I'm starving. But no. The father then grabs the picture of Jesus, looks at it, and says, "Thank you for providing us with this wonderful meal." And then he kisses the picture. He passes the picture to his wife, and she does the same thing. Then the kids. My friend passed it to me, and I had no choice but to say the line and kiss the fucking picture. That was the last time I ever went there. A new girl started at my school in 6th grade. I was paired with her to show her around because I've always been the kind of person who's nice to everyone and was kind of a loner. We also shared the same first name, which I was excited about since I'd never met anyone else with my name before. The other kids in our class quickly began picking on her because of how she smelled. She also had bad skin and hair. She ended up with no friends, and I felt sorry for her. She was such a nice girl. She invited me to spend the night at her house one weekend. I went. I shouldn't have. That's when I found out why she had the odor she did. Her mother was a raging nut and made her almost solely responsible for her younger siblings. At just 11 years old, she had to feed, bathe, and put them to bed every night. And then came bath time. She bathed her little sister and brother first and then herself. She wasn't allowed to shower or drain the tub to draw fresh water for herself. She had to bathe in the same water her siblings had just used, and probably urinated in. She told me she knew they sometimes did, but her mother would lose it if she tried to use different water for herself. She also had to use the same bar of soap for her body and to wash her hair. She didn't have many clothes either and had to wear each item multiple times before she was allowed to wash them. The entire house was a disaster, just a total trash hole. I was horrified by everything I saw and never went back. Growing up, one of my friends and her family had this evil little dog. I'm a die-hard animal lover, especially dogs, but this one was mentally ill or something. Every now and then, it would fly off the handle and nip or bite one of the 7 kids they had. I remember one day specifically, it bit my friend, slicing her finger open to the bone. The mom made excuses for the dog, and my friend, by that point, was so used to it that she didn't even argue. Then, the mom sewed her finger shut herself. I sat there, wondering what the fuck was going on, just continuing to talk and gossip with my friend and her mom while this insane DIY surgery was happening. Sure, stitches are expensive, but I'm still amazed she didn't get a massive infection. Nothing changed with the dog afterward. Her brothers were still just sitting on the couch petting it like nothing had happened, watching TV. Needless to say, I didn't dare go near it. Also, the whole family believed in things like energy healing and chakras, which isn't the weird part. One day, I tripped over one of their hundreds of potted plants and ripped one of its enormous leaves. The mom made me sit by the potted plant and feel what I'd done to it, and apologize until it forgave me. To make things even weirder, my friend's younger sister claimed she could see people's chakras and the plant's energy. She literally sat with me until the plant's energy turned back to a happy color. I unfortunately grew up in the creepy family. My mom was obsessed with Titanic. Almost every surface in the house was covered in something related to it. She'd talk for hours about the movie, the ship, and how she believed she was the reincarnation of a passenger, to anyone who would listen. She cross-stitched themed pieces, made picture carpet crafts, and played My Heart Will Go On non-stop. She spent hours on video games, collecting pictures, and chatting with others online about it. Once, for my grade 2 speech, she rewrote the entire thing to be about the ship. She even came to class, handed me the new cards, and sat there while I gave the speech she wrote. For my birthday, she got me a t-shirt and a clock, both ship-related. She hung them up in my room, and I wasn't allowed to touch them. Christmas gifts were those decorative commemorative plates. She even got a tattoo. At one point, I managed to have a friend over for a sleepover. He was immediately weirded out by the overwhelming collection, so we stayed in my room, which was relatively free of her stuff. But that night, at 2 a.m., my mom, who is mostly deaf, decided to blast My Heart Will Go On loudly. You could feel the vibration of the music through the walls, the floor, straight into your skull. Normally, I would have ignored it, but my friends started asking questions, and for the first time, I stopped to think, why was this okay? It was summer, we had no AC, and the heat and noise were unbearable. Exhausted, I decided to confront her. I asked, why are you playing that in the middle of the night? My friend then got a front row seat to my mom yanking me to the ground by my ear and screaming, louder than the speakers, about how she was the adult and I had no right to question anything. If you've never heard a mostly deaf person scream, it's impossible to describe just how terrifying it is. After that, my friends stopped coming around, and soon, everyone at school made fun of me because my mom was scary. I couldn't even disagree. That night made me realize just how weird my family really was. I was grounded for a week. No toys, no going outside, no TV or radio, no books. Just sit in my room, listening to that song on repeat from the other room. Looking back, it's all so messed up. Whenever I visit my hometown and run into old friends or adults I knew as a kid, they always say, "Oh, we almost called Children's Aid." Don't almost call them. Just do it. Please. As comical as this sounds, spending 7 straight days with literally nothing to do but listen to that song being played from the other room could probably be considered child abuse. I remember it was during Euro 2004. I went to a friend's house for a sleepover. I was 12 years old at the time. My mom and his mom dropped us off at his house and left. His dad was there, though, and I never liked that man. When we arrived, he greeted us in the most unwelcoming way, like he absolutely hated having me there. We went to my friend Michael's room and started playing on his PS2. About half an hour later, his dad entered the room and said, "Okay, I think it's about time, Michael." Michael immediately sat up, unplugged the PS2, and handed it to his dad, who then placed it on a high shelf. After that, his dad made a hugging gesture, like he was inviting Michael for a hug, and said, "Speak the words." Michael hugged him and said, "Thanks, Father, for reminding me to be moderate with distractions from real life." The hug ended, his dad nodded at us to go to sleep, and left the room. I went to bed completely weirded out by what had just happened. My child brain back then even felt guilty for playing PS2, like it was something bad. The next morning, we woke up, had breakfast, and greeted his mom, who was there making coffee. Michael then went over to his dad, knelt before him, and said, "Please, Father, can I be distracted for a while?" His mother acted like this was completely normal, like nothing strange was happening as her son knelt on the floor to beg for permission to enjoy himself. His dad looked at me, then at Michael, and reluctantly got up to bring down the PS2, like it was the hardest thing in the world for him to do. I didn't even touch the controller. I was so uncomfortable I just sat there. Never slept over there again. In my first few weeks of high school, I made a new friend who quickly invited me over to his house. He and his family seemed like extremely down-to-earth, normal people at first. We sat down at the table for a meal. I don't remember the finer details of what we ate, but after a while, I noticed my friend and his younger brother licking every last crumb and bit of sauce off their plates. I didn't think much of it at the time, maybe they were just really hungry or it had been a long day. An hour later, his mother came into my friend's room holding my dirty plate. She angrily demanded to know who hadn't licked their plate clean. My friend nervously pointed at me. She was furious. She asked, "How is the next person supposed to eat from it if you haven't licked it clean?" Then she stormed out of the room. I sat there in disbelief, thinking, surely, this can't be real. I asked my friend if they actually washed their plates. He casually replied, "Of course. We use our tongues so the next person can use it." Needless to say, I never went back to that house. Not really creepy, but definitely weird and funny. When I was about 11 or 12, I used to go to this guy's house after school. His mom had all these crazy rules about everything. One of them was that we could only have our afternoon snack at exactly 4:30. If it was 4:27 or 4:35, she'd completely lose it. She'd literally look at the clock to make sure it was the right time before letting us eat. My friend even had a little alarm clock set to go off at 4:30 so he wouldn't risk missing snack time. It was crazy. But wait, it gets weirder. She had 2 separate sets of snacks in the pantry, one for her kids and one for her kids' friends. Her kids got the good stuff, and I mean really good stuff, massive jars of Nutella, crepes, brioches, all kinds of amazing pastries. Meanwhile, her kids' friends, me included, were only allowed to have the off-brand budget snacks, and only a small handful at that. She'd even keep an eye on us to make sure we didn't sneak any of the good stuff. Oh, and here's the kicker, this wasn't some struggling family. They were wealthy. I went to elementary school with this girl who would host a big sleepover every year for all the girls in our class. There were only about 10 of us, it was a small school. Her parents were super strict about bedtime, which isn't that unusual, but they were also insanely paranoid about robbers and had the most intense security system I've ever seen. This system was so sensitive that once her parents turned it on after everyone got into their sleeping bags, you couldn't move without setting it off. Rolling over in your sleep could trigger it. They would send us to bed at 7 p.m. and expect us to stay silent and completely still until morning. Every single year, without fail, someone would move during the night, and the alarm would go off. The dad would come running downstairs with his shotgun, and the mom would call the cops. Every single year. I had a good friend in elementary school whose family lived in a farmhouse that looked like it belonged to the Addams family. Every wall in the house was covered with crucifixes, not small ones, but massive 2 to 3 foot tall ones. Every single wall. The bathroom, bedrooms, closets, everywhere. There was a room upstairs we were forbidden to go into, which of course meant we had to sneak in and see. It turned out to be a full-blown Vatican-style chapel. It had burning offering candles, pews, an altar, and a massive 6-foot crucifix with Jesus hanging on it. But that wasn't even the most WTF thing about the house. They had a cuckoo clock they called the prayer clock. The clock face had the 12 disciples instead of numbers, and I never figured out what came out of the clock on the hour, probably Jesus. Every single hour, the clock would chime, and my friend's mom would round up all the kids to write thank you prayers for everything we had done in the last hour. These prayers would go into the prayer jar. If we played with Legos and had a snack, for example, I'd have to write, "Thank you, Jesus, for letting me play with Legos and eat string cheese." She'd read the notes and make us edit them, saying things like, you had apple juice too. Don't you think Jesus would be sad if you didn't thank him for the apple juice? By about 4th grade, I refused to go over anymore. It was just too weird, especially since their mom had just had a new baby, and they didn't believe in diapers. They let the baby crawl around naked, making a mess everywhere. What happened to the kids 24 years later? The youngest, the roaming baby, became a Catholic priest. The second youngest decided to change their gender and now lives a different life. The oldest, my friend, became a programmer in Silicon Valley. The father eventually left the mother. Definitely has to be my neighbors when I was younger. I used to hang out and play with these 3 siblings, and they were all pretty normal kids. The mom, however, always seemed kind of clingy. During the summer, we'd spend most of our time outside playing baseball, hockey, riding go-karts, swimming, the usual. But every single day at around noon, their mom would call them back to the house, one at a time. Each kid would have to go inside for about half an hour, then come back out, and the next kid would go in. I didn't think too much of it at first. One day, though, I was inside their house when it happened, and I found out why. She had mandatory cuddle time with each of her kids. They would lie on the couch, and she would spoon them in silence for about 30 minutes each. It was, without a doubt, the weirdest thing I've ever encountered. I went to this guy's house once after school. I wasn't friends with him, but we were assigned to a project together. We'll call him Gary. Anyways, we were working on this project when he excused himself to use the restroom. 15 minutes later, he returned. A little while after that, I decided to use the restroom while he was making snacks. I walked into the bathroom and, behold, floating like a manatee through the brown estuaries of Florida was the result of Gary's earlier bathroom excursion. I shrugged it off. I mean, we all forget to flush at least once, right? Flushed for him, took a leak, flushed again, and went back to work on the project. Gary's mom got home from work a couple of hours later. She nodded to us and said hello politely before heading toward the back of the house. A few seconds later, she stormed back into the kitchen where we were working and screamed, "Where is it?" I jumped, totally confused, and shot a "what the hell" look to Gary. Gary muttered, "It wasn't me, it was him." His mom glared at me, huffed, and walked out. Gary later explained that every day after school, he was required to leave his dump in the toilet so his mom could check it. He wasn't sick or anything, she just wanted to inspect it to make sure he was healthy or something. I never went back to Gary's house. An old friend's mum was completely paranoid that Al-Qaeda would storm the small British town they lived in. Her solution? Have a massive bomb shelter built under their house. Not the weird part, though. About 5 times a year, she would spend literally thousands and thousands of pounds on groceries to stock the shelter. And by this, I mean she would genuinely buy out the entire supermarket over the course of about 20 trips in a week. It wasn't just canned food either, she'd buy perishables, too. I only found this out because I slept over during one of her shopping days. Food covered literally every single surface of their massive house. My friend just shrugged it off and casually said, "Oh, yeah, just restocking our bomb shelter. We always need to be ready for invasion." When we were in high school, my best friend's dad did some seriously creepy stuff. When we were 13, he gave her a large diamond engagement ring and told her she was forbidden to get married until she found a man who could buy her a nicer one. WTH. We were 13, we didn't want to marry anyone. We spent most of our time playing N64 and riding bikes. When everyone started dating, she wasn't allowed. Finally, she was very excited and said her dad had had a vision from God that she was allowed to date now. I'm religious, so I'm not knocking religion, but dude, that didn't happen. He came to a school dance and pinned the boy she was dancing with against the wall. The police were called. Dad was banned from school grounds and all school functions, including graduation. Her mom never said a word that I heard. My friend was embarrassed by it, but more in an "OMG, dads. LOL" kind of way rather than realizing how creepy it actually was. She had 2 brothers, and they were allowed to do whatever they wanted. I was just beginning to see this girl in high school, let's call her Sarah. After a few weeks, she invited me over to her house for dinner. Classic Valley family, pretty Christian, all blonde, dad's a construction worker, mom's a hairdresser, and they live on a dirt road. My mom drops me off at their place way out of town. I meet them, we chat, and everything's going well as we talk about current events. Since it's early November of 2012, I start joking about how stupid it is that people think the world is going to end next month. Shut up. You could hear a pin drop after that comment. Total silence. Sarah is just glaring at me, her sister is staring at her dad, and her dad is giving me the angry dad stare. Oh fuck, what did I do? Then her mom starts bawling and leaves the table. What's wrong? I ask. Shut up, her sister yells again. I excuse myself to the washroom. I know I've fucked up and should just go home. When I come out, Sarah is waiting for me. She explains that her mom is just sensitive to the idea of big, depressing death stories like those and doesn't like how she can't escape from it, even when the TV is off. Okay, makes sense. So I tell Sarah I'm sorry. She says it's okay and suggests we go downstairs to watch a movie in the basement. Booyah, night recovered. Until I went to said basement. The entire place was stocked for the end of the world. Guns, food, rafts, maps, everything. I tried to play it off and asked what they were for, hoping for a sane answer. For when God will wash the wrong. We're just being prepared, she replied. I walked all the way home that night. I once went to my friend's house for her birthday party when I was in middle school. The family was super weird. All the walls were painted these horrific pastel colors, and every single room had at least one photograph of Jesus, if not multiple. We're all hanging out at the party, and the mother comes up to me and very sternly tells me she would like a word with me. First, she was mad at me because we do not swear in this house. Okay. But all I said was, geez. Second, she informed me, we do not frown in this house. Not frowning wasn't enough, if you weren't constantly smiling, you were in trouble. Jokes on those weirdos because my parents bought that house several years later. We didn't even realize it until after the fact. Now we curse and frown all the live long day. I had a classmate from 6th through 8th grade who had a childhood I'd describe as terrible. She's really successful now, just graduated law school, and everything she posts on Facebook seems to show a happy, full, and interesting life. But, geez Louise, it was so unsettling to see how her family mistreated her back in the day. I barely know where to start. Her mom was absolutely determined to make her into this weird sort of Victorian, prim and proper lady. One day, she came to school with bruises on her arms and told everyone it was from volleyball practice, but I didn't buy it. A few months later, she asked me to dance with her at the school dance, and I just flat out asked what happened to her arm that day. I don't think she would have told me at all if she hadn't been flustered by my direct question, but she admitted that she'd forgotten her math book at school, and her mother had knocked her around for it. She once told me she got grounded for a month because she wrote the name of the cute guy in our class in her notebook, and her mom found it when she went snooping. We were both choir kids and the only ones at school who took voice lessons. When we went to ISSMA, a music competition, we sang level 1 songs at the local high school. I ran into her mom screaming at her in the hallway after her piano solo. Apparently, she hit a wrong note, got a second place ribbon instead of first, and couldn't advance to the next level of the competition. I tried to comfort her, but she wouldn't let me and instead just congratulated me on getting first place for my vocal solo. The craziest part is that she has 3 siblings, 1 older and 2 younger, and they're the most down-to-earth, normal people you could ever meet. I once asked her younger sister what was up with all the insane expectations placed on my classmate, like being required to be fluent in French by 5th grade and taking ballet 3 times a week. Her sister's face went pale, and she just said, "We don't talk about that." She was the sweetest girl ever, and back then I was convinced she didn't even know how to say anything mean about anyone. I think about her all the time. I went to a friend's house when I was 8, and his mom took us to McDonald's. When we got back, I realized my order was completely wrong, it was a different sandwich. I decided to be polite and just eat it anyway, but I planned to remove the parts one didn't like. My friend's mom wasn't having any of that. At first, she quietly but firmly told me that no one in their house wastes food. I explained that the order was wrong but reassured her I would eat it and just remove what I didn't like. She then grabbed the sandwich out of my hand, put the stuff I had scraped off back into it, and insisted that I eat it as it was. She said I wouldn't be allowed to leave or hang out with my friend until I finished it. At this point, I was completely freaked out. I didn't even feel like eating anymore, I just wanted to go home. Then she started banging her fist on the table and bawling, yelling at me to eat the sandwich. The noise and crying got so loud that her husband came into the room to see what was going on. He consoled her, told her to calm down, and then turned to me and my friend and said, "Get in the car. I'll take you home." That incident still sticks with me, even now. It makes me uneasy every time I think about it. A family I knew growing up had two boys I was friendly with, but they had a really unusual and unsettling rule: no one in the family ever wore seatbelts. It was illegal, of course, but their mom didn't care, they would just pay the fine if they got caught. Because of this, other parents wouldn't give the boys a ride to or from school. Their mom would insist they not wear seatbelts, but no one else was comfortable letting them ride in their car without them. Their mother firmly believed that the safest thing in a car crash was to be thrown clear, and that seatbelts would prevent this. It turns out their dad had died in a car accident when the vehicle caught fire. Their mom believed he might have escaped if he hadn't been wearing a seatbelt. I was friends with these twin brothers in high school, and they usually hung out at my house. One day, they invited me over to theirs, which was in the same neighborhood. I didn't think much of it and went along. The house was a mess, but I didn't mind too much. My house has a lot of clutter too, so I figured it was no big deal. We hung out, played video games, and everything seemed normal until it was time for dinner. They invited me to stay, and I accepted. After dinner, I went to the kitchen to put my plate in the sink, and that's when I noticed it: a huge pile of dirty dishes, a filthy stove, and roaches crawling all over it. One of the twins came in behind me and opened the cabinet to grab a glass. That's when I saw hundreds of roaches crawling all over the inside of the cabinet, on the door, inside the glasses, and on the plates. Plates that looked just like the one I'd just eaten off of. He thought it was funny, yelling, "It's alive," as he opened the cabinet door. I was horrified and nearly threw up right then and there. Without saying a word, I turned around and left the house, went home, and never spoke to them again. A few years later, I ran into one of them at a gas station. His teeth were a disaster, brown, yellow, and completely rotten. He mentioned working at a nearby Rally's. Needless to say, I haven't eaten at that Rally's since. Had a girl I kinda sorta dated, but I noped out as soon as I realized how crazy her mom was. Back when my family's computer wasn't working, this was years ago when smartphones weren't really a thing, I asked the girl if she could log into my MySpace account to check something for me. I can't even remember what it was now. She agreed, logged in, and that was that. She logged out, and I didn't think anything of it. A few days later, I got a MySpace message from her mom. The message basically said there were things I needed to delete from past conversations, mostly from previous relationships, if I wanted to be with her daughter. WTF. To make it even weirder, the messages she mentioned were, pretty graphic considering how young we were. Turns out, when I gave the girl my login credentials over the phone, I was on speakerphone, and her mom was listening the whole time. She stole my password, logged into my MySpace, stalked everything she could find, and then sent me that message, dictating what I should delete to avoid offending her daughter. Like that's something normal people do. I dipped out immediately. I wasn't about to deal with that level of crazy.